They boarded the yellow school bus at 8:14 a.m. 14 kids, one teacher, one driver. By noon, the school said the trip was canceled. By evening, no one came home. There was no Amber Alert, no headlines, just silence. 10 years later, a hiker stumbled into a swamp and saw the roof of a bus peeking out of the water, with handprints still pressed against the glass. Detective Morrow stood at the edge of the newly uncovered chamber. He was no longer surprised by how deep they'd buried it, the silence, the neglect, the refusal to act. But even he didn't expect what they found beneath that second layer of concrete. There was no mass grave, no bodies, just more proof. In the far end of the bunker, past the makeshift beds and rusted water jugs, they found a second compartment. Inside, old medical supplies, identification tags, and a clipboard with a name still visible. Franklin Community Youth Pilot. It matched the photo Simone had received weeks earlier, the one showing the children in front of the wooden sign. New beginnings. And behind the clipboard, a sealed envelope. It was addressed to the one who wouldn't forget. Simone opened it. Inside, one sentence written in shaky script. They said if we smiled, they'd let the others go. Denise read it aloud that evening at a private vigil. No cameras, no press, just the families. And when she finished, she turned to the other parents and said, "We weren't crazy. We weren't overreacting. We were right. And we never stopped being their parents." They lit candles, not just for the children they lost, but for Ms. Daniels, for Clay Hopkins, and for the future they were determined to protect. Months later, the Franklin Youth Site was permanently closed. The land was declared a federal investigation zone. The developer company dissolved. Several public officials quietly resigned. Some disappeared from public life entirely. No arrests were made, but the public now knew. And that was a beginning. Simone's documentary, The Names They Tried to Bury, aired across multiple platforms. It ended on a single-frame Jada's crayon drawing. 14 stick figures, a big yellow bus, the words, "Our Real Trip," and in the background, Jada's voice, pulled from an old second-grade reading project, echoed, "When I grow up, I want to help people remember. Because if you remember someone, they're not gone. Not really." That night, Denise sat alone in Jada's room. She didn't cry. She reached for her daughter's journal. On the final blank page, she wrote, "We found you. We said your name, and we always will." She closed the book and placed it on the shelf, not like something to forget, but like something sacred. Time passed, not the kind that erases, the kind that clarifies. By the second anniversary of the bus's recovery, the town of Riverside had changed. Not in headlines, in habits. Teachers now logged every field trip in duplicate, one physical, one digital. Parents signed off on 2 forms, one from the school, one from the district. And every bus ride began with a roll call that ended with every child saying their name aloud. "Not just so we know you're here," Principal Johnson would say, "but so you remember you're real. You matter." One girl, Kiara, barely 10 years old, raised her hand in class and asked, "Do you think the 14 knew they were heroes?" The room fell silent. Then her teacher, a young woman named Miss White, who once knew Jada in kindergarten, replied, "They didn't need to know. They just needed to hold on long enough for us to learn." Every March 18th became Remembrance and Resistance Day in the county. A day when schools paused regular curriculum and focused on 3 things: the history of the 14, the systems that failed them, the voices still waiting to be heard. They didn't teach it as tragedy. They taught it as blueprint. What happens when people pay attention too late? And what can change when they listen earlier? Denise continued her poetry workshops. She didn't teach form or meter. She taught truth. Say your name. Say what they tried to call you. Then write who you really are. At first, the kids resisted. But then they began filling notebooks with words like, "Louder than missing. I'm the headline you skipped. You thought I'd stay silent, I made a song." One day, a boy named Mason, who had never spoken in any class, stood up, held out a folded drawing, and said, "I think I saw them." Everyone turned. Denise stepped closer gently. "What do you mean?" He unfolded a sketch. It was a dreamscape. A giant yellow bus riding on a cloud, 14 shadows inside one of them smiling. Mason said, "They come to me sometimes, in my dreams. They don't look sad, just waiting, watching." Denise knelt and asked, "Do they say anything?" He nodded slowly. "They say, 'We see you trying, keep going.'" That night, Denise took out Jada's journal again. But instead of writing to her daughter, she wrote to the future. "This is what it means to survive, to speak after silence, to build where they tore down, to teach the story not because it's over, but because it still matters. At the garden, a new plaque was added. They did not vanish. They are with us in memory and motion in every name we dare to say out loud. And under that, in etched child handwriting from the original crayon note, our real trip. 3 years after the memorial was completed, the mural made its way to Washington. Not a copy, the original, preserved panel by panel, transported by the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Denise was invited to speak at the unveiling. She wore the same purple scarf Jada had loved. No prepared remarks, just a single sheet of paper in her hand. She looked at the crowd, students, journalists, politicians, and said, "You're not here because of a tragedy. You're here because 14 children believed the world would listen someday. And because one teacher wrote everything down. And because one mother, like so many of us, refused to sit still." She looked up at the mural where Jada's smile stretched out under an arc of sunflowers. "This isn't a memory, it's a map. Follow it." That same year, a best-selling graphic novel titled Still on the Bus hit shelves across the country. It told the story through the imagined eyes of Jada herself, not as a victim, but as a time-traveling messenger who rides the cloud bus to different towns, leaving clues and helping other missing voices find their way back. It became required reading in over 120 school districts, not because it was true, but because it helped people imagine what might have been if we had listened sooner. At the Foundation headquarters, a new section of the website launched The Children Who Remember. It let young people submit stories of dreams, visions, or intuitions they'd had connected to the 14. Most were simple. "I had a dream I was running and someone held my hand. I drew a girl I've never seen. My mom says she looks like Jada. When I see a yellow bus, I feel safe and scared at the same time." They weren't treated as evidence. They were treated as echoes, and those echoes mattered. Simone, now editor-in-chief of a national investigative publication, gave a TED Talk titled, "Not All Missing Persons Are Gone, Some Are Just Waiting to Be Seen." She spoke not only of the 14, but of the patterns that allowed them to vanish. We didn't need more sirens. We needed more systems that ask, "Where is this child today?" We needed more people who said, "Why aren't they here?" We needed fewer closed doors. Her talk ended with a photo, the last page of Miss Daniels' notebook. It said, "If I vanish, promise me someone will keep the list going." They had. At Jada's old school, now renamed Daniels Warren Academy, there's a new rule. Every class begins with a roll call, but not just names. Each student chooses a word that defines them that day. Strong, hopeful, angry but showing up, quiet but listening. And every Friday, they gather at the tree planted in Jada's honor and read one line from the original poem she wrote in 2nd grade. "If I don't come home today, tell the sky I was smiling anyway." One winter morning, Denise received a letter. No return address. Inside a single photo. It was hand-drawn, a child's sketch of a bus in the sky, stars twinkling around it, and a single word in shaky handwriting, "Home." She placed it beside Jada's journal, then walked to the porch, sat down, and, as always, waved to the sky. His name was Isaiah Lattimore. He was supposed to be the 15th, the last child on the list for the 2014 school trip. But that morning, he had a fever. His mom, Carla, kept him home, made him soup, told him he wasn't missing anything. Then came the silence, and the years, and the guilt. He didn't speak about it. Not to classmates, not to teachers, not even to his mother. But every year on March 18th, he woke up with a heaviness in his chest, like something was trying to breathe through him. It wasn't until the bus was pulled from the swamp that he began drawing again. At first, it was just scribbles, then names, then faces, then dreams. One night, he woke from sleep covered in sweat, whispering. Jada said, "Tell them we were real." He kept his sketches to himself, until one day Simone came to speak at his college. After the lecture, he waited in line, trembling. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He just handed her a folder. Inside, 14 portraits, one of each child drawn from Isaiah's memory, from dreams, from a place he couldn't explain. At the bottom of the last one, Jada, he wrote, "She looked at me and has said, 'You still have time.' So I'm using it." Today, Isaiah teaches art at Daniels Warren Academy. He doesn't talk about the trip. He doesn't have to. His classroom walls are covered in drawings not of tragedy but of triumph. Each year, his students pick a name from the 14 and imagine what would their story be if it didn't end that day. They write songs, paint murals, build sculptures, and then at the end of the year, they place each creation in a traveling exhibit called Still Onboard. It tours libraries, rec centers, churches, and every child who visits it leaves a note on a wall titled, "To the Ones Who Didn't Come Back." Isaiah visits the memorial every year at dawn. Before the crowd, before the speeches, he brings 14 sunflowers. He stands by the glass case with the rusted bus inside. He presses his hand to the window, closes his eyes, and says, "I still hear you, I still see you, I'm still riding for you." And then he turns away, not because he's leaving them, but because he's carrying them forward. Isaiah's traveling exhibit Still on Board made its way beyond Riverton, first to Atlanta, then to Detroit, then to a small town in New Mexico where no one had heard of Jada Warren, but by the end of the visit everyone knew her face. Children from all over began sending in their own editions, poems, sketches, short videos, addressed not just to the 14, but to the larger idea of those who were lost in plain sight. Simone called it the Archive of Unforgotten. The foundation made space for every piece, no submission too small, no memory too faint. It became the largest crowd-sourced storytelling project ever compiled for missing and marginalized children in North America. And at its heart always was the bus. One story came from a woman in her 60s named Geneva Willis. She'd grown up in the 1960s in Mississippi and said she'd spent half a lifetime trying to forget what happened to my cousin on a trip we were told never existed. She sent in a photo. 2 girls smiling in front of a bus. One of them had a birthmark identical to a child in Simone's research files. A match was confirmed. The photo went up next to the 14 in the Still on Board exhibit. And just like that, it became 15. Denise, now recognized nationally, was invited to speak at a congressional hearing on educational transparency and child protection. She wore her daughter's sunflower pin. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply placed 14 laminated sheets on the table, each one with a face, a name, and a single line under it. I waited. Then she looked each person on the panel in the eye and said, "The question isn't why we didn't know. The question is who decided not to look." No one had an answer, but every single person in the room was silent for nearly a full minute after she sat down. It was the longest silence Congress had held in decades. One spring, a new school was built, not in Riverton, but in Chicago. Its name, the Daniels Warren Institute for Memory and Movement. The school offered full scholarships to students whose families had experienced system-level neglect or historical erasure. Its motto carved in stone at the gate, "We were never invisible, just waiting for someone to see." In its courtyard stood a sculpture abstract twisting steel shaped like a bus melting into flight, its windows open, its path endless. At night, light shone through each cutout, casting shadow figures onto the pavement. They moved in the wind, and to some they looked familiar. On the 10th anniversary of the bus's discovery, the town hosted a full-day remembrance. Not a funeral, not even a memorial. A celebration of presence. Students read out names of not only the 14, but dozens of others whose stories had come to light because of them. Isaiah, now co-director of the archive, read last, his voice steady, his hands trembling slightly. He said, "They didn't disappear. They became echo, and echo doesn't die. It waits. For the right ear to hear, for the right heart to answer. We were that answer." Then he stepped aside. A children's choir began singing an original piece titled, "We Are Still on the Bus." No one moved. No one filmed. They just listened. In a small town outside Milwaukee, a man named Jerome Banks worked as a janitor at a local elementary school. He'd never heard of the 14. He didn't follow the news. He didn't read articles from faraway towns. But one afternoon, while sweeping under the auditorium bleachers, he found a child's notebook left behind. Inside, a drawing of a bus floating in the sky. And under it, in blue crayon, "We don't forget because they waited." He didn't know what it meant, not yet. That night, curiosity drove him to search. He typed in "bus swamp children" and hit enter. He read until sunrise. By morning, he wasn't just informed, he was different. And the next week, when his school's principal announced a field trip with no clear manifest, Jerome asked, "Where's the list of who's going and who's staying behind?" The principal blinked. No one had ever asked that before. That was how it spread. Not in protests, not in speeches, but in questions whispered in the right ears, in new habits formed after heartbreak, in the quiet courage of people who chose to see what others had tried to forget. Meanwhile, in Riverton, Denise finally returned to the swamp. She hadn't gone back since the bus was pulled from the water. She came alone. Just her and a faded photograph she kept in her wallet, Jada, age 9, holding a sunflower bigger than her face. She stood near the waterline where cattails swayed and dragonflies hovered in the sun. She didn't cry. Instead, she closed her eyes and said softly, "We did it, baby. You're not stuck here anymore. You're everywhere now." She placed the photo on the water, let it drift, then turned and walked away, head high, hand steady. That same week in classrooms across the country, kids took part in something called the Roll Call of the Remembered. Each student, after saying their own name, would choose one name from the archive and speak it aloud. I'm Janelle. Today I carry Isaiah Rivers. I'm Marcus. Today I carry Jaleesa Monroe. I'm Kendra. Today I carry Jada Warren. And for the rest of the day, whenever a teacher called on them, they'd answer, present for both of us. The roll call spread to community centers, to youth detention programs, to libraries and neighborhoods that had long been left out of the conversation. And every time someone asked, "Why are you doing this?" the answer was always the same. Because someone once waited for someone like me. In the final update of the Still On Board exhibit, a new installation was added. A single rusted school bell. Mounted inside a soundproof room, visitors entered one by one. They pulled the cord. The bell rang loud, clear, and endless. And as the room vibrated with that solitary chime, a voice would whisper through the speaker. They waited. We heard. Now, it's your turn to carry the sound. If you made it here, you didn't just watch a story. You carried it. Share your thoughts in the comments. What stayed with you most? A name, a moment, a truth. Like this video if you believe their voices and all unheard voices deserve to echo beyond silence. Subscribe to Tim Stories for more real stories that refuse to be erased. And turn on notifications because the next name might need you to say it.